Hi there, guys, and welcome to WP JPWC 24 as channel. And this is my interview with Ree. Thank you for joining us, Ree, and agreeing to talk to us today.
That's okay, Jack. Thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to voice my opinions.
No problem at all. So, why don't we start with your story with mental health?
So, for me, at the age of 8, I showed signs of OCD, and by 11, I developed an eating disorder. At 15, I was admitted to my first inpatient mental health ward, and I spent 8 months there but was discharged with no improvement to my eating, unfortunately. So I rapidly deteriorated until I was put on bed rest and sent to a specialist eating disorder unit an hour away from home. There I suffered a breach of human rights, neglect, and abuse, and came out with even more trauma than I went in with. After a year and a half at hospital, I was discharged again. Um, this time on nasogastric feeding tube in the community. So 18 months in the specialist unit, and they weren't even able to get me onto oral nutrition. It was an absolute joke. The therapy was non-existent, and there was nothing put in place to help me get better. When funding ran out for my feeding, I ended up in general hospital for 4 months. And then 4 days after my 18th birthday on Christmas Eve, I was moved to my first adult unit. I spent 12 months there before being transferred to a PQ for 6 months. That was done out of spite. You see, there'd been an undercover police officer secretly recording the abuse we face, and it became a documentary. Channel 4 dispatches hospitals undercover, are they safe? And those of us who were featured suffering the abuse were picked on and treated differently. So after 6 months in the PQ, had ended up becoming really ill. I was discharged briefly again and then admitted to my current unit where I've been for the last 20 months.
Thank you for being so honest with us. I can't imagine it's been an easy time for you.
No, it hasn't. It's a bit long-winded explanation, but that has been the last 6 years of my life.
Of course. Just to touch on something that you've said, you mentioned the breach of human rights, neglect, and abuse. Could you expand on that a little bit?
So one example I'll give is an incorrect use of restraint. So, I don't want to be too triggering for the people listening. So, trigger warning on this if you have an eating disorder. But for the nasogastric tube feeding, they would have to restrain us. And once I had someone do it wrong to the point where they were pressing on my neck and my lips turned blue.
Wow. Wow, that must be quite traumatizing.
It was luckily because of the cameras in the hospital, that person did end up being dismissed. But
Mm,
there were many, many other um, things like this that went on.
yeah, it sounds like a truly horrible experience. How did this begin? What were the signs that you noticed when did you notice them?
So my childhood would have appeared to other people as happy. Um, I was undiagnosed autistic, so I struggled a lot. I prefer not to go into detail about my parents growing up. I'll
Hmm.
just say my parents divorcing was one of the best things my mum could have ever done for herself, my siblings, and I. The signs were simple things, really. I got overwhelmed easily, would hide under my bed in the dark to calm myself down. I didn't realize that at the time it was because I was becoming overstimulated, which is something that regularly happens when you're autistic.
Hmm.
I also developed a huge germ phobia and had an obsession with things feeling just right. So an example of this was one time my mum was showing me something and wrote in my maths exercise book. She rubbed it out, but the indent left on the page afterwards felt like it was the end of the world. The book would never be the same again. Everything was ruined. That's how extreme it was.
Mm, mm. And in terms of your germophobia and your obsession with getting things right, like the OCD, do you have coping mechanisms for that now?
I still struggle with it a lot and that now. I have actually been back and forward with having the diagnosis removed and then put on again. Um, it's, I would say, my biggest challenge to date.
Okay.
I don't really have any coping strategies that I could share.
Okay. No problem. No problem. So with eating disorders, they tend to have stereotypes of throwing up after meals, being unhealthily skinny, not eating, etc. How did your experience live up to these stereotypes?
So, to put it bluntly, these stereotypes kill.
Hmm.
Some eating disorder behaviors do include purging, restrictive, and obsessive exercise, all of which I've struggled with personally. But there are other
Hmm.
behaviors too. Some people, for example, struggle with binge eating. So sometimes I fit the stereotype, sometimes not. Sure, I've been at unhealthily low weights, but in reality, less than 6% of people with eating disorders are actually underweight, which is a statistic that tends to shock most people because they have
Mm.
this image of um, someone being skin and bones. I have struggled and continue to struggle with restriction, but my exercising has become a lot more controlled rather than obsessive. Most people with eating disorders do eat. Most people with eating disorders are not underweight. The videos you see of extremely underweight young white females crying and shaking over a plate of food is unrealistic. It's posted for shock factor and is detrimental to society's perception of eating disorders, really. They can affect anyone, any race, any age, any gender, any sexuality, anything.
Okay. Given that, if you think that so if you had someone close to you that was struggling with an eating disorder, what would be the signs to look out for? You know, like when it's you think they're struggling with it.
I would say a main sign is secrecy around food.
Mm.
Um, Unfortunately, eating disorders are very deceptive, manipulative illnesses. So, whilst the person himself is not deceptive or manipulative, the eating disorder makes them lie and try and cover things up. Um, so, I'd say look out for signs of not wanting to eat around other people, eating in secret, um, stashing food for later, um, all sorts of things, really. My signs were not as obvious. It was things like leaving the window open at night time so that I would shiver because I genuinely believed that I would needed to burn those 2 or 3 extra calories that having the window open all night would achieve.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't have ever thought of that one. Um,
Yeah. There are so many toxic articles and things that are so easy to access online, of ways of losing weight, ways of shedding weight overnight, 3 foods to avoid to lose weight, all these sort of things. So it's very easy to fall down the rabbit hole.
yeah, I think as a society we've kind of made this image of what's beautiful, and it's tends to be very skinny, unfortunately. And I think it's unrealistic a lot of the time because a lot of it is photoshopped and fake.
Yeah.
And this is where the image comes from for, I think, from a very young age, especially with women, but men as well, um, to look a certain way, which causes these eating disorders, I guess.
Yeah.
So who is your support network and how have they been since your diagnosis?
So my support network is my mum and all of her side of the family. They're amazing. They do their very best to understand as much as possible. Um, my grandma, bless her, texts me to make sure that I've eaten. When I have leave from hospital, she cooks for me, but makes sure she lets me serve and doesn't put pressure on me to eat a certain amount. And if her generation can do that, someone from her generation and not having English as a first language can
Mhm.
understand, I think other people can also understand. My mum herself has spent hours on training courses about eating disorders run by the charity Beat to help her help me. Um,
Mhm.
they have been incredibly useful. I'm so grateful for my support network. I have the most amazing friends as well. They always say, staff say to you, don't make friends in um, psych wards, in psychiatric hospitals, because you're all ill and could trigger each other or learn negative behaviors off of each other, etc., which can be very true. But I have also met friends for life in hospital. I've met the most incredible, brave, strong people that have added so much to my life and supported me through everything.
Yeah, that's really great. 2 points that you've made there about your grandma, and I think it's so easy for certain generations to not learn about something because they don't understand it. And I think it's really amazing that your grandma and your mum as well has made the effort to learn in order to support you. Because I think certain generations can be very dismissive of things, and it becomes a
Yeah,
little bit stereotyped with them. But you haven't had that, which is great.
yeah.
Um, and I think with the not making friends in a psych ward, I think because you guys are there for as long as you are, I think it would be impossible not to make friends. Because I mean, I think at the same time as yes, you could trigger each other, but it's also very true that you could support each other because you are going through similar situations in there. I'm assuming, I mean, I've never been in one myself, but I'm assuming they put you on wards with people that have similar disorders to you, or
So usually in CAMS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, um, the psychiatric wards tend to be people who have um, depression, anxiety, um, self-injury behaviors, eating disorders, but there are specialist units for eating disorders. And occasionally you'll get a patient with psychosis, but not very often. Whereas
mm,
in adult services, there's a wider range of reasons why people are admitted. Um, Drug-induced psychosis, paranoia, schizophrenia, things that you don't see so much in the child and adolescent side of things.
mhm.
But yes, because you live together, you do become like family. You
Yeah,
see these people more than you do see your own family.
yeah, of course. I think it's kind of non non-existent that for the staff to say don't make friends because I don't think you could not. Otherwise you'd be
Mhm.
very, very lonely in there, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
So what sorts of support have you used and help have you used, such as medications, therapies, apps, groups, anything like that?
So initially, when my family were not aware of my struggles, I used Childline's online chat where you can just message back and forth with someone who can help support you, which I found really, really helpful. There's also an app called Calm Harm that's very good to combat self-harming urges. So it provides different distraction techniques, release techniques, breathing techniques, depending on what you're needing in the time. I've been on a range of different antidepressants and antipsychotics, amongst other medications, and that's really just trial and error. CBT individually is what I have found most helpful. I have had group DBT, which so many people love, but I really can't stand, and
Mhm.
individual and group CRT, which is a fairly new therapy based around thinking styles. So I was actually part of the study for that when it first came out. I was in the trial selection of patients. Um, I think personally, everyone benefits from different things. So I wouldn't say to write off any kind of therapy based on what you've heard from other people.
Mhm.
Um, give everything a chance.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, as you say, you found CBT helpful. I personally didn't. It was more of a plaster for me, whereas I needed to find the underrooting cause. Um, Obviously, CBT is behavior therapy. What is DBT and CRT?
So DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy, and the
Hmm.
four main modules of DBT are mindfulness, um,
Mm.
emotional regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and gosh, the other one has slipped my mind. Interpersonal effectiveness, mindfulness, emotional regulation, and there's a fourth one, but I can't remember right now.
Don't worry.
Um,
It's okay. Okay. And
so
CRT?
so CRT is cognitive remedial therapy. As I mentioned, it was new out when I started it. It looks at thinking styles, so bigger picture thinking, finer detail thinking, switching between different thinking styles, and things like that.
Oh, that's interesting. So you say it was new when you started it. How long ago did you start that?
So that was roughly 6 years ago.
Okay.
Um, and I hadn't heard of it being used after that at all until a few weeks ago when the ward I'm currently in started up a CRT group.
Okay. Okay. So it might be more available now than you thought,
Mm.
which is good. It's good. So you're currently in hospital. Is
Yeah.
this your first visit?
No, so I've spent the last 6 years in and out of a lot of different wards.
Hmm. And how's your treatment over the years been, other than obviously what you've mentioned already? Um, yeah.
So I have really suffered in hospital, but I'm finally in a better hospital and making some progress. It's a slowly but surely sort of thing. The road to recovery is never really linear. So I have blips, I have setbacks, but I also have good times as well.
That's good. And I think that is important to mention that the road to any recovery is never linear. And you can't beat yourself up and put too much pressure on yourself when you do have setbacks, when you do fall back into old habits and things like that, because that is part of the journey. And these recovery journeys are, well, I mean, they're for life technically, because you're constantly battling with it, but you learn better ways to manage it, I think.
Yes, definitely. I really agree with that.
And how could the professionals that look after you handle these situations better?
There are so many things that can be done, in my opinion, in terms of staff within psychiatric hospitals. They could read the care plans more often, that everyone is written up a care plan of what helps them, what doesn't help them, etc. So if they were read more often, everyone would actually know what to do for each patient when they go into crisis. Unfortunately, staff don't usually have the time to actually implement that, reading up on patients because they're too busy attending to patients. Staff also fall asleep or use their phones whilst supposing to be caring for patients. So I've had this happen to me many times when I have been on 1-to-1, 2-to-1, or 3-to-1 observations, which means 1, 2, or 3 people with you in order to keep you safe from self-harming behaviors. And I was on 1-to-1 and had someone who was on their phone not paying attention. And I had an incident, a self-harming incident, that led me to be rushed into resus and have an emergency operation and then spend some time in ICU.
Jesus. When you've had these incidents, do the hospitals deal with the staff?
Not really. You can complain that a staff member has fallen asleep, but or is on their phone, but it's often your word against theirs. And they need proof for it. But if you were to take out your phone and photograph staff members asleep, which I have done, you then get told off for taking people's photos without their permission.
Right, so you can't really win, really.
Yeah.
Isn't there CCTV in these hospitals, though?
There is, but it's not very good and not enough to see whether someone is just resting their head down or genuinely asleep.
Right.
But we
And
know because we get woken up by the snoring.
yeah, I can imagine. Do you think this is to do with the way that they're doing the hiring at the moment, or do you think they generally don't care, or do you think they're understaffed and overworked? What do you think is the cause of it?
It's a bit of everything, really. So they definitely are understaffed and overworked. Um, for example, today on our ward, we had 3 nurses and 3 healthcare assistants, and we have 4 people who are on 1-to-1 observations. So that leaves 2 other staff members free at any time to check on every other patient. So they were really stretched, and then someone went home sick. So numbers reduced even more. Um, a lot of it has to do with budgeting and finance. They
Hmm.
don't want to have to hire agency staff because they have to pay them more. Um, it's a lot of things really. And then the staff that do come in that are agency really just don't really care that much. Some do, some are amazing, but often they don't care that much. I've had them get a blanket out, kick their feet up on my desk, and tuck themselves in and go to sleep.
Wow. Yeah, I suppose for agency staff, they're there for the money for one, but I think it's harder to grow that sort of attachment to care. I mean, I know they're in a care professional, and I'm not justifying it in any way, but obviously when you're working on a ward every day, you'll build sort of a rapport with your patients, you begin to care about them, and I think that makes it easier. Um,
Yeah.
Agency staff obviously might be only be there one day and then be in a completely different place the next, which I think is in your sort of ward is not ideal at all because I don't think it helps you guys build anything with anyone, and I don't think it helps for them they're caring. But thank you for sharing that. Um, so what are we up to? How's your mental health been with your eating disorder and the treatment you've received? So I'm guessing it's obviously affected it. Has it caused you say like to go into depression, anxiety, things like that. You obviously mentioned the self-harm, but yeah, if you could tell us a bit more about the mental health side as well.
So I have got a lot of trauma from abuse I've experienced throughout treatment. I am a lot more stable now, but there are still things that trigger me, that are very specific niche things, I guess you could say.
Hmm.
I can't have people touching my head, because that reminds me of the restraints when I would get fed. Um, so things like that are still really, really hard for me. I can't do COVID tests because having a swab up my nose sends me into flashbacks once again of having a tube being put down my nose. Um, so yeah, there is a lot of trauma there.
It's almost like PTSD, I guess.
Yeah.
Is I'm really sorry you had to go through that, but I am glad that you're feeling more stable now and you're in a better place. Um, so with your experience, what generally causes eating disorders?
So, as I mentioned before, eating disorders don't choose, they don't discriminate. Anyone can be affected regardless of social situation, gender, sexuality, age, race. Um, for me in particular, it was the fact that I was very sporty as a child, yet was not so much recognized for my achievements, um, compared to, say, my older brother. And that made me more and more determined to prove myself by exercising more, and then it sort of just spiraled from there. Competitive sports such as dance, gymnastics, and cheerleading that are centered around appearance can often cause eating disorders as well. I did do dance as a child, but not for a prolonged period of time.
Hmm.
But really, it could affect anyone.
Okay, okay. And how can you start to get help? Well, how did you start to get help? Where did it begin?
So for me, it was my friends who got me help. My friends in school um, noticed my self injury and noticed my low mood and alerted the teachers at the school, who then looked into things. Um, for anyone who's struggling, I'd say find someone you trust. But you must remember, if you pose a risk to yourself or to others, they will have to alert the appropriate people. That being said, everything else you tell them should be confidential. So don't be afraid of asking for help or telling someone that you're struggling, because it should be kept confidential. And if you do pose a risk to yourself and are having thoughts of perhaps harming yourself or ending your life, still try and open up, because although they then have to go through procedures, it will save your life. It can be so, so hard opening up. Um, for me, I thought if my self harm was found out, my world would end, but it didn't. And I ended up actually discovering a really good support system. I'd also recommend advocating for your needs as best as possible. So telling people exactly what you need, saying, I am struggling with this, I need this.
Hmm. No, thank you. And you said your friend obviously was the first ones to alert. I mean, this was when you were what, a teenager?
Yes, it was.
That's a really big thing for a teenager to do because I mean they would be scared of what the outcome is as well. Um,
Yes,
I
I
don't
was
know.
very lucky to have friends that cared about me so deeply. Um, at
Definitely.
first, obviously, well, not obviously, but at first I was quite annoyed at them for um revealing something that I didn't want anyone else to know about. But in doing so, they saved my life, and I'll forever be grateful for that.
Yeah. I mean, you say not obviously, but I think that is a natural reaction to in these situations is and it is important to remember that they are not going to thank you immediately when you try and help someone with an addiction, with an eating disorder, with mental health, because they wanted to keep it secret because they think they can deal with it themselves. But the problem is that majority of cases you cannot, um, and you do need that support, and they will thank you in the
Not
end.
only not only is it a case of most of the time you cannot handle it on your own, it's
Yeah,
also a case of you don't have to, you shouldn't have to, you deserve the support.
definitely, definitely. And someone that is, if someone is listening and they thinks they might have an eating disorder, what would your advice to them be?
To please, please, please seek support. It will never feel like the right time to start recovery. Your eating disorder will always want you to go further, get iller. But the truth is, eating disorders are serious no matter what. Whether you've been hospitalized, tube fed, underweight or not, you're valid as you are and deserving of help right now. It's not a case of a certain level of illness. It's not a case of you have to wait until you're on the brink of death or you look like a skeleton or your bloods or ECG come back badly. It's if you are struggling, it's time to start recovering.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I think majority of us that have been through any sort of mental health will have wished that they had done something sooner. But,
Yes, I do.
but we're all a genius in hindsight, aren't we? But if we can get someone else to act sooner, that would be the goal. Um, So you mentioned before that you scored high for autism. So how does this play into your eating disorder or affect it?
So it does make things a lot harder for me, because I struggle a lot with the sensory aspects of eating. So smells, textures, and tastes are something I'm very sensitive to. So
Hmm.
it greatly limits the foods I'm able to eat that I consider my safe foods. Of course, I would like to just put a disclaimer on that saying all foods are safe.
Yeah.
All foods are safer than not eating. Um, However, for me and for other people who are in recovery, they tend to have certain foods that they find less distressing than others. And like we have labeled them as safe foods.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm very limited in terms of safe foods due to the autism and the sensory needs.
Wow, okay. So both of them combined together actually makes it worse.
Yeah.
Um, when you say that the certain foods can be distressing when you eat them, what does it do to you? What sort of reaction would you have to it?
So, from an eating disorder point of view, if you're eating something that you believe or society deems to be unhealthy, or bad, which of course is just um, not true. There
Mm.
are no bad foods. But if you are eating something that society deems to be unhealthy, then you can often get stressed, anxious, feel very guilty for eating it, and then in turn want to do compensatory behaviors such as exercising, um, to try and negate the fact that you've eaten that. From a sensory point of view, if I eat something that I take the first bite and it's too many textures or flavors combined, or I don't like the texture of it or the smell of it, that just puts me right off, and I will avoid that food or meal um for a very long time.
Mm, interesting. Okay. All right, that's good to know. Um, so is there anything else that you would like to say to anybody that's listening right now?
Yeah. Um, I'd like to say that your recovery doesn't have to look perfect. You don't have to eat the so-called clean, healthy girl foods and go to the gym and become a fitness queen to recover from your eating disorder. If your recovery looks like eating foods that society deems as unhealthy, that's okay. Food doesn't have a moral value. If you never go to the gym, that's okay too. Your recovery looks how your recovery looks. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't compare yourself to others. It doesn't matter what society says. You know yourself. And if you feel like you need to do something in order to get better, do it, whether that's challenging unhealthy foods or not exercising when you feel the need to. Um, do do whatever is best for you because everyone is an individual. Um, Also, I would like to say that you never know when you could start feeling the effects of it. So, unfortunately, um, a month ago, I lost a fairly close friend, who I had been in the eating disorder unit with. Lovely, lovely girl, one of my best friends. And she was doing well and she was in recovery, but the lasting effects of her eating disorder in her teenage years had already damaged her body. So that's why you have to start recovering as soon as possible because these things have a long lasting effect on your body.
Wow, yeah, that's a really powerful message, and I'm so sorry for your loss. Um,
Yeah.
that's huge. And just because I don't think we've actually covered it, how old are you now, Ree?
I'm 21 now.
21. Okay. And how old was the girl that you were friends with, if you don't mind me asking?
Um, she was 22.
They're around the same age, but it was just the level of her eating disorder, I guess.
Um, well, we had been through very similar experiences with our eating disorders.
Mm,
Hers just happened to have strain on her body. I won't go into details in terms of respecting the family's privacy.
of course.
Um, but yeah, even when you think someone is recovered or someone restores weight, is eating things orally, you never know what the impact the years before have had on your body. So
Mm,
don't let there be years before.
yeah. And I suppose, and also we've got to remember that all of our bodies are different, even though they're made up the same. Were they the way that things affect it is always going to be different. I mean, you look at smokers, for instance. Me personally as well, I'm a smoker, and that will affect someone's body completely different based on genetics, age, living environment, situation. So it will be the same with eating disorders. So the damage that will be done will be different depending on different people.
Yes, definitely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ree, and telling us your experience. You are truly brave for doing this and extremely strong for fighting it as long as you have. And I am really glad to hear that you are in a more stable place and, of course, a better hospital now.
Thank you so much for having me, Jack, and for allowing me to share my story and my opinions. I've rambled on a bit, but if this could help even one person, it's worth it. So thank you for having me.
No, definitely, and that's the aim, isn't it? We want to help as many people as we can, but even if we just help one, that is the more important thing. And I think your story and your message and how open you've been with us is really going to help someone.
I really hope so.
Thank you. So everyone listening, please go and check out Ree's profile and show her some love. And we will be back hopefully soon with a new interview. So this has been JPWC 24. I hope you have a great day and a great mental health day, and we'll speak to you soon.